Hello, Heather. We're here with Heather Mills, who will be speaking at Gulfood on February 21st and 25th at Dubai World Trade Center.
Looking forward to it.
We're really grateful to have you back, and there's a lot of news since you spoke last year.
Yeah, I really enjoyed speaking last year, and even though a few eyebrows were raised and people saying, "No, this vegan thing, it's just a trend, it's not a movement," and now people are understanding it really is, and it's essential for the animals, the health, and the global warming, how we can improve it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
You've always been a pioneer and a visionary when it comes to the food industry, and what you've been doing is just finally really getting a lot of traction globally with plant-based meats, and now we have the cultivated cell-based meats. I wanted to really hear what you think where this is moving in the years ahead.
Well, yeah, it's been 26 years since we started trying to push meat-free and dairy-free and fish-free alternates. And in those days it was all very soy because that was subsidised. But we also did pea proteins and fava and chickpea and lentil proteins, but they weren't cost effective, and also now oat protein isolates. So we've had all of this, a bit like we've had the electric car forever, but nobody's been able to make it cost effective. Now it's grown, and there's been this hockey stick turn. Procurement wise, we're able to be more efficient by buying volume so that we can be more competitive side by side on a shelf next to meat, fish and actual dairy. So in the VBites Mega Burger is 27% bigger than all the other vegan burgers, but still less of a price. And I wanted to do it so that it was affordable to the whole family, because not everybody can afford much money on their food. So the whole point of VBites was quality and affordability and flexibility, so that with procurement, as more and more companies become plant-based, they need to think, are the companies around them that are supplying them with the produce able to scale as rapidly as they are? Otherwise you've got one element of ingredient missing and then the whole company goes down. And that's something I spoke a lot about last year and needs to go into more detail this year, because meat, fish and dairy companies have not always understood that it's a completely different process to make plant-based alternates. It's not like just milking a cow, making cheese and squeezing it into a tube or a box. It's completely different. The water temperature, the whole elements of how it's made, how it's cooled down, make it a perfect product or make it awful. And there are elements of starches and stabilizers and natural, like our vegan cheese is 100% natural, allergen free. If one of those components is missing and you don't own and run the company that provide that, you put yourself at risk, and that's food security wise. So on top of that, we also need people to become self-sufficient. I'd like to bring one of our factories as a setup to the Middle East so that they can create more self-sufficiency and less dependency on importing everything in. But to do that, you have to prove there's a demand within the countries that you export to. VBites exports to 24 countries. And then once you've proven the fact that they want it, then it's worth setting up micro sites around the world, and then depending on what is growable, and now with hydroponics most things are growable, we can decide what ingredients we're putting in our products. We have 142 products. We have the largest range in the world because I want variety, and I want everybody to not say I can't go plant-based or vegan because of this. So you have to create an offering and variety, and so we can move between different protein isolates and different products. And because we have 600,000 square feet of plant-based facilities, unlike a lot of manufacturers, we're working with farmers to help them convert their arable land from dairy into growing oats, for example. Newcastle's famous in Scotland for doing the Quaker oats, which is one of the Pepsi brands. So creating things from that, we do a plant-based oat cheese, just basically everything. So it's really important to talk about food security and self-sufficiency and sustainability.
So what do you find is the biggest obstacle for getting more wide-scale adoption of vegan meats, plant-based?
It's a lot wider than it was when I started 20 odd years ago. It was interesting because I came to the Middle East the first time in 1995, and I was the lead speaker at the Jeremiah Beach Hotel on, then it was landmines and human security. I was vegan, but nobody was interested in bringing any meat, fish or dairy alternates, and we were in the early stages of development because I'd lost my leg and became vegan just 2 years before. So there was no interest there whatsoever. So when I came back and tried to push it 3 years ago, it was still, people didn't understand the difference between vegetarian and vegan. And they'd say, oh, well, I'm vegetarian. I'll say, well, if you're dairy-free, wonderful. But if you're vegetarian and you're still having dairy and you've replaced something, you're actually having more dairy. Vegetarian's not good. But now there's more understanding, more awareness, and Spinneys embraced our products when I did the demo last year after doing the speech at your show, and they said, okay, let's go for it. So I think when you say how is it going to be that people will adopt it more, it's about availability and great product and awareness and you know, having a great brand. We were in Holland and Barrett for 20 odd years with 84 products, but we were exclusive to them, so we couldn't change our branding, so it became quite dated. And once we got out of that exclusivity, we then rebranded everything so that the branding matched the quality of the product, because a lot of the time the branding looks fantastic, but the product's not very good.
I can imagine you get a lot of pushback from the food industry and the meat producers.
We
Especially.
did, yeah, we did, and then I did a speech in Europe at Brussels on the future of farming agriculture, and of course I went on stage and it's all farmers, so they were like, shh, the vegan crazy plant-based woman, but by the time I finished they all came up for selfies and they said, well, I'm not vegan but my kids are, so can I have a picture with you for my kids? And so that was the story all the way. I said, well, why don't you even try it? And they were like, oh, vegan, I'm a farmer. So I said, you know that actually you could make a 10% EBITDA rather than actually be dependent on the subsidies that the taxpayers are having to pay. So surely you'd like to be, you know, a profitable business that's helping the animals and the environment. They went, oh, that's interesting. How do you do that? So if the land was right, we could convert a lot of farms into growing oats and different plants as alternates. So the farmers have started to embrace us more because we can actually, and that's what I learned getting older. I'm 53 last week, but when I started all this, you know, I was 25, and I was like, oh, don't eat that because it does that, and people were like, oh, here she goes. So I thought, you know what, I'm just like a parrot. I just need to feed them, and especially the men, because it's all about food in their stomach. So if I feed them great products, then they go, oh, well, this doesn't taste vegan. And then you change people and you challenge their perception of what it is. So I've learned the hard way, and finally come up with, you know, some really great products that are a mixed array for everyone. Like our vegan fish steak is made from konjac, and then because we have the highest level omega-3 algae, docosahexaenoic acid and EPA, we've just made that into an isolated powder that will be the future of ingredients. And every 2.5 tons we grow depletes CO2 by 1.5 tons. So that will go into the fish alternate products. So you've got your natural omega-3, because people think omega-3 comes from fish, and it doesn't. It comes from the algae the fish are eating. So why kill the fish to go in and squeeze in a capsule? We might as well take the algae, make it into a powder, and then put it into the product. So these are all evolving, developing, but algae is the future.
So where do you produce your algae?
In England, yeah, it's all in England. There's only 3 manufacturing sites of scale in the world, and there's our manufacturing site in the UK, there's DSM Martech in America, and there's a company, I can't remember the name of, in Canada, and then the rest is all made in China. The whole China thing, and pre-COVID and now during, people are not wanting to get products, and the old melamine and baby formula issue. we make it in Britain, and every 2.5 tons, 1.5 tons depletes 2.5 tons of CO2, and then we encapsulate and make it into powder there. So it's pure and it's solventless. So people will make claims of having a certain level of docosahexaenoic acid, which is DHA, or icosapentaenoic acid, EPA, for brain function and microbiome and synovial fluid. It's just so good for you. But when you analyse it, when it becomes part of a big corporation, they start to mix and blend down with other oils. So it's very, very important that the consumer reads the packet of anything they buy. For example, we're adding to the range probiotics, hydrochloric acid, and digestive enzymes to help people's digestion. But when I see some of the probiotics out there, they put in cornstarch or maltodextrin, which is horrific for the digestive system. So you're taking something that's meant to help your digestive system, but they're filling it out to extend shelf life or with binders. And it's just like, oh, why are you just cutting corners and duping the consumer? So the consumer has to really educate themselves. And luckily, with the internet, the good side of the internet, if you educate yourself enough, you'll read everything on the packet and understand it.
I've read that you're a world-class skier, and I understand you still keep very active. How did it change when you went to a vegan diet? Did your performance change?
Well, yeah, for the good. So I'd always been athletic as a kid, and I became vegan and fully plant-based at 25. And we came from a poor family, so we couldn't go skiing. You had to have money to go skiing. So I didn't actually learn to ski race. I went on holiday a couple of times before until I was in my 40s. And the Icelandic volcano went off. I was stuck in Austria, and I thought, oh, I'll try this. And because I've got a prosthetic leg and there weren't any proper ski legs then, I just got in a tuk and went straight. And then I was approached by the Austrian team. I was actually told that I was out of order and should slow down. I said, well, I don't know how to turn. I've only got one leg. And they were like, what? So they taught me, and I basically believed that I could become a world speed record holder in my 40s because I was plant-based. Because our products all have 22 grams of protein in. I have ridiculous amount of energy because that's what you get from eating the right diet. And I just wanted to show that you can be in your 40s. I was 47 when I got the world record, and 4 gold medals, and in downhill in Super G, and silver. I got my silver as a wild card because they wouldn't have me on the team because I was too old. So I took a wild card and went to Australia, and then over to New Zealand and won the slalom there, silver. And that's definitely down to food. And I've converted probably most of the big names in sport and celebrities just by finding out what they love, making it, and showing them how to change. Like I got Carl Lewis to go from being a vegetarian because he thought that was healthy, and of course dairy is the worst thing for you, and converted it into.
But probably the people that would make the most use of becoming vegan are the people that are the least interested, the working class.
Yes, which is why you have to make it cost effective. Because when you're working class, which is what I am, I came from a very poor family. I left home when I was a teenager. I lived on the streets. You know, I set my first business up by the time I was 17. So I know what that side of life was like, and I know we had to struggle to get money to get food on the table. So it's really important that it's affordable, and you know, a lot of working class people, even 10 times more busier than anybody else because they've got no help. So yeah, it's really, really important.
But don't you think, like, the way people perceive vegans, it's a lot of sophisticated, it's activists.
Well, I'm glad you think that, because it never used to be. We tried to make it a bit more hip and glam and sexy just to get it in the media.
Yeah.
But you know, when I started in the 90s, and there were people vegan obviously way, way before me, but it was very much hairy armpits, white face, Birkenstocks, because the education of needing B12 and things, which you need as a carnivore also and can be lacking in. So the perception was, especially in Britain, because it was the 60s hippies, so it was, you know, hairy armpits and all that. So I always joke with them every time I did a speech. I would see them in the audience and I would say, you know, you could like make it a bit more sexy so we can appeal to the younger generation. And I don't mean sexy like, you know, in that way. I mean like cool and hip, because then it would be discussed and talked about. But not so that it's like, so we wanted to make it aspirational instead of those vegans, because that's how people perceived us. And so I'm glad you said that that's what people think, but it's not aspirational at all. And don't forget, just because we make products that are meat, fish and dairy free, if you are 100% plant-based and you love just vegetables, you might not like the taste of meat, fish and dairy free or dairy generally, never mind an alternate that tastes similar. Then if you're living off lentils and pulses and beans and you can digest them, then they're not expensive to buy. And that is the best thing that you could put into your body as long as you can digest it.
I want to hear your thoughts about the impact that it has on the environment. I think everybody agrees that it is very destructive with cattle, methane, carbon emissions. But the biggest challenge is not the meat eaters in the West. It's in the third world or developing nations where when they reach the middle classes, meat consumption explodes. How can we encourage these people that start to be able to afford meat to not eat meat and to eat plant-based meat?
Well, it's interesting you said that, because I was contacted actually about 4 years ago from the Chinese government, and they said, could you give us some advice, because the fast food business in China has just exploded, and you rarely saw an overweight or obese Chinese or Japanese person unless they were going in for a sumo wrestling competition. You know, they were pretty healthy people. You didn't see acne, which is most of the time created, if you don't have an extreme hormone problem, from all the hormones of overconsumption of dairy. So you could see all of these things coming in: acne, eczema, obesity. And they said, what can we do? I said, unfortunately, it's evolved so much that it's aspirational, cool and hip to go to a fast food joint. I said, so what you have to do is bring in the alternates, which I did as a test in New York. I donated $1 million worth of products to help the kids that were just getting $1 a day to live off McDonald's. So I just replicated McDonald's back in 2003, I think, and said, this is a free cafe, and come here instead. And you saw obesity reduced, type 2 diabetes reversed, type 1 insulin injections down, asthma, eczema, everything start to improve. Studies in the school, when they looked at studies over 4 years, brain function went up, the results were better. You know, it literally, and the way to do it was to introduce it as a burger for burger. You know, when Jamie Oliver went over after, he found it very hard to get people to chop up vegetables and do things for schools because it's so much work for catering. All you have to do is burger for burger, vegan chicken for vegan chicken. Then the taste buds change, the metabolism changes, and then you put in some vegetables. We grew vegetable gardens on the top of all the rooftops, the flat tops, and now it's like vegan heaven there. And they might have a tiny little piece of vegan chicken, but it's 90% fresh plant-based foods. So what you have to do is you have to wean them off, and it's the same in China. You just get in, like we do vegan cheese for pizzas, and you do like for like, and then eventually the taste buds would change, and then you go back to the original way of eating. You know, the first people to do meat alternates were the Buddhists. It goes back a long, long way, made from tofu and bean curd and things. So it will do a full 360, because people will see, and you get two types of the younger generation: the ones that are just on social media and watching the Kardashians, and then the others that basically care, think, ask questions, and push our generation to start cleaning up our act, because we made such a mess of the planet. And you know, the environment, the animals, and people's health. There is always one of those three that people are interested in.
So you invest in a lot of innovative companies. You have your own fund, I believe, with VBites.
I've got VBites Ventures that I set up to help small startups.
What are you seeing now? What's the most exciting thing in the food industry?
so much. I mean, the algae is obviously the most exciting for the future of plant-based and getting those into products. I started up quite a while ago, and then we had Brexit, and then we had COVID, a vegan milk company with Mr. Milkman, and I thought, let's do home delivery. And luckily the timing was absolutely perfect, because nobody wanted to go out. Even if they could go to the supermarket, the really vulnerable didn't want to leave. So we did glass bottle, environmental, home delivery, oat, coconut, and almond milk. And then what I've done next is, a while ago, is you can set up the units in the supermarkets so people can come back with their bottles and just fill up. So they minimise the use of Tetra Paks, you minimise the use of plastics, and try and create more efficiency. When we did the first potato starch carrier bag in the early 90s, that went into Planet Organics on Bayswater, people said, oh, that's not going to take off. I said, it will, and people will start to bring their own carrier bags back and recycle them, and then these can be compostable. But it was all a bit ahead of its time, and you have the idealism, but the realism is you have to make it work in scaled manufacturing. When we did our production in the days of frozen only food, and then we moved it also into chilled, you couldn't do things in biodegradable cardboard, because you'd send it to somebody and you'd have a squashed defrosted burger because it was just cardboard. You had to have it in plastic, and it had to be recyclable. So when people say, why don't you go biodegradable? You can, but you have to literally make those machines defunct. So that's millions of pounds of machines, and that's where the realism kicks in. So you have to add a line on and then start doing biodegradable to the supermarkets, who will pay the price. Somewhere along the chain, someone has to cover that cost, otherwise you've got a zero margin. And it needs to be spread from the farmers, the manufacturer, to the supermarket, to the consumer. Right now, the farmer pays a big price, the manufacturers do, supermarkets make their margins, and then there's the consumer at the other end. So now that people like Spinneys and Waitrose are realising that their consumer wants quality, so they're actually willing to, pay for more ethical packaging and things. But yeah, it's very easy to have idealism, and you go, well, I want something. And one of my customers said, oh, well, can you send me, I don't want any plastic on it. I went, are you sure about that? And I sent them some vegan meatballs just in cardboard, and it arrived, and they went, it was all squashed and defrosted. I went, yeah, because it's in, you can't have all of it. We want shelf life. Can we have 6 months shelf life, but with no additives and no this and no that? Yes, you can extend shelf life with salt and potassium sorbate. So we need to get manufacturing more regularly and put it out. And even though I wanted to move completely away from frozen years ago, because of gases from freezers and real idealism, the reality is that you can keep virtually all the additives out when you freeze them compared to when you chilled.
A really big topic now is supply chain and locally sourcing and knowing the origins of your food in the wake of COVID. How is vegan foods, how does that play into this trend and new demand in the market?
Well, the thing is, I said ages ago there's going to be controversy about palm, because I've watched David Attenborough for many, many years, and he started talking about orangutans, and that brought the food industry to its knees, because palm, aside from the orangutan thing, which is horrific, me being a big animal lover, it's probably the most sustainable, efficient per capita. So I said, look, we're going to have to switch to coconut oil, but be prepared that later it's going to then go to something else and something else and something else, because there will always be something controversial created about something. I said, so you have to remain flexible in your R&D when you're making something. So we'd always been sustainable palm, always, but because people don't actually always understand the difference between palm and sustainable palm, I just said it's too complicated to explain, so let's move to coconut. I said, but I can bet your bottom dollar there's going to be some controversy one day on coconut. And of course there was in Thailand. The farmers were sending monkeys up trees, nothing to do with our coconut chain, because ours is 100% traceable. and certified. But there was a small percentage happening there. Well, of course, the media blow it into something massive, which is important to stop that behaviour. But it could bring the coconut industry to its knees. So it's very important to understand there will always be controversy about one product unless it's bad for your health. But it doesn't mean that your particular product is coming from a bad chain because you can prove your traceability. And also on procurement, the more you can make your own products, which is what we're looking into more and more about growing within our own country, I think that's what needs to happen. This world's never going to be the same again after this pandemic. People are always going to be, a bit cautious, getting too close to each other. I think fidelity is probably going to go up. People are going to be a bit more careful, which is not a bad thing. So there'll be some benefits from it. But I think we need to create local procurement, local self-sufficiency, and look at what is growable in our own environment. And luckily in the Middle East, with all of the sunlight and everything, you could do a lot with the algae. So I'm interested to talk more about that with people here.
So what are we going to be hearing on from you at Gulfood?
I don't know, because there's too much in my head. So it depends how long you give me. I'll try and keep it succinct. And I think mainly about food security and problem solving and thinking ahead and giving information so people don't have to make the mistakes I've made. They can learn from them and get through them quickly, because I know, having been involved very much in the minutiae of scaling, it's very easy for someone to make a product in the kitchen. But when it comes to scaling, it's a whole other world, and that's our expert area. You have to really amend a lot of things.
Wonderful. We will look forward to hearing you speak at Gulfood at Dubai World Trade Center, February the 21st to the 25th.
Great, looking forward to it.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.